Basra, often called the southern gateway to Iraq, is a lively city with a population exceeding 1 million. This historic metropolis has been a bustling centre of commerce and culture for centuries. Its busy docks play a crucial role in trading valuable commodities like dates and oil, and the region surrounding Basra is famous for its rich oil reserves, with a local refinery dedicated to processing this vital resource. To the southeast, the Rumaila oil field boasts billions of barrels of crude oil, contributing about 14% of the world's total oil supply. Furthermore, northeast of the city lies the West Kurna field, recognized as the second largest oil field globally. Yet despite its wealth of resources, Basra has faced significant challenges throughout its history, primarily due to the impact of enduring modern conflicts. In 1914, British forces seized control of Basra from the Ottoman Empire, and it wasn't until 1932 that British troops withdrew, allowing Iraq to attain nominal independence. However, during World War II, the Anglo-Iraqi War briefly erupted in 1941, with British forces regaining control of Basra and its surroundings without much resistance, as they sought to advance towards Baghdad. The conflict concluded before this goal could be achieved. In the 1980s, Basra became a primary target during the Iran-Iraq War, and was subsequently bombed by the United States during the Gulf War in 1991. That same year, the city saw a major uprising aimed at toppling Saddam Hussein, fueled by the US-led expulsion of the Iraqi army from Kuwait. Initially, residents had high hopes for support from the US, but that optimism quickly faded when such assistance failed to materialize. Consequently, Basra endured years of sanctions, bombings, and severe oppression under Hussein's regime. Throughout the 1990s, the city witnessed a troubling rise in birth defects and childhood cancers. This was largely attributed to the US's use of depleted uranium munitions used during the 1991 conflict. The situation then worsened under sanctions that restricted access to medical supplies and inflated prices for essential goods. By spring 2003, British forces prepared for the Iraq War, putting Basra right back into the line of fire, where one of the most intense and notorious battles unfolded. The campaign was marked by striking scenes of Challenger tanks manoeuvring through the scorching heat, and infantry navigating the ancient streets that had witnessed generations pass before the arrival of modern conflict. This is the story of the Battle of Basra. Welcome to Wars of the World. The invasion of Iraq kicked off on March 20th, 2003. Just 2 days prior, US President George W. Bush issued an ultimatum to Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein and his 2 sons Uday and Qusay, demanding that they leave the country or face military action. By the time this ultimatum was delivered, extensive political and military planning for the invasion was already in full swing. In late 2002, residents of Basra became aware of the looming invasion and started prepping for an attack. They organized militias and began constructing fortifications in order to brace themselves for the onslaught. During this period, the city faced regular bombings, which heightened the sense of urgency among its people. The US military pinpointed Basra as one of its key targets in the war, and military spokespeople conveyed to the media that the Shiite population in Basra would be likely to welcome the invading forces and to rise up against Saddam Hussein. This claim was part of a larger public relations strategy devised by the US and UK governments in order to drum up support for the conflict. Military historian Raymond Callahan observed that among Iraqi cities, Basra was anticipated to fall swiftly, providing immediate and striking visuals. Colonel Christopher Langton of the International Institute of Strategic Studies stressed Basra's importance, stating, quote, "Capturing it would send a strong message to the regime. We've taken control of your oil and commercial hub." On March 19, 2003, US and UK forces entered Iraq from Kuwait, approaching Basra along the road infamously known as the Highway of Death from the Gulf War. The invasion forces advanced slowly along this route, creating a traffic jam of military vehicles. The initial clashes of the invasion occurred near Basra's oil fields and coastline. Some fires had already been ignited at the oil facilities, with flames being visible across the border in Kuwait. At the time, US Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld condemned Hussein's actions, declaring, quote, "It is a crime for that regime to be destroying the riches of the Iraqi people." The coalition forces' immediate goal was to secure Basra and the nearby Rumaila oil field, and by March 22nd, US Marines had successfully taken control of the oil field, and aircraft had dropped leaflets over Basra, urging Iraqi soldiers to surrender, and some of them complied. On March 23rd, two soldiers from the Royal Engineers, Sapper Luke Alsop and Staff Sergeant Simon Cullingworth, were both captured in an ambush by Fedayeen fighters on the outskirts of Basra. Unfortunately, both were later killed. The following day, Lance Corporal Barry Stephen of the 1st Battalion Black Watch Regiment lost his life when a rocket-propelled grenade struck near his armoured vehicle in Al-Zubayr, close to Basra. This was followed by another tragedy, when on March 25th, a Challenger 2 tank suffered friendly fire from another British tank stationed outside Basra, resulting in the deaths of 2 British soldiers, Corporal Stephen John Albert and Trooper Geoffrey Clark. "12 Challenger 2 tanks from C Squadron Royal Scots Dragoon Guards began their advance from Al-Faw to Basra. Coalition forces had faced unexpected resistance in and around Basra, and after several days of fighting, most American troops had shifted their focus northward, leaving Basra under a protracted siege led by British forces, who were deemed better suited for the situation due to their prior experiences in Iraq and Northern Ireland. British ground forces consisted of the 7th Armoured Brigade, affectionately known as the Desert Rats. They were tasked with spearheading the advance into the region. They were supported by the Royal Scots Dragoon Guards, equipped with advanced Challenger 2 tanks that provided formidable firepower and protection. Additionally, the Royal Marines from the 3 Commando Brigade played a critical role, employing amphibious assault techniques to advance through the waterways that dissected the region. Reinforcements included specialized infantry units, combat engineers, artillery gunners, communications personnel, medical teams, and logistics specialists, each of whom was vital to the operation's success and the safety of both troops and civilians. On the opposing side, the forces comprised remnants of Saddam Hussein's regular army, the elite Republican Guard, known for their combat prowess, and the Fujahideen Saddam, a paramilitary group fiercely loyal to the regime and well acquainted with the urban landscapes of Basra. British commanders faced a complex challenge as they aimed to take control of Basra, while minimizing civilian casualties and maintaining essential services such as water, electricity and healthcare. And from the outset, the strategic approach involved a careful and deliberate encirclement of the city, utilizing paths through the desert, canals and marshlands to outmaneuver the defenders effectively. The need for caution was paramount, as the city was home to many civilians who had developed strategies for survival amidst conflict, often venturing from their homes only when confident of the risks involved. This awareness of the local populace's plight underscored the British military's commitment to conducting operations with a focus on preserving life and securing the city's infrastructure during a tumultuous period. British troops had established a cordon around Basra which had a twofold purpose: to limit the defenders' access to reinforcements and supplies, while also applying pressure on their morale, all without causing extensive destruction to the neighbourhoods. By doing so, the British aimed to create a situation where a rapid military push could achieve decisive results, instead of getting bogged down in a prolonged conflict. To gather intelligence, patrols probed the outskirts of the city, while artillery units identified enemy strongpoints for targeting. At the same time, reconnaissance teams created detailed mental maps of potential approaches, choke points, and areas where ambushes might occur. Inside Basra, the ruling regime employed fear as a powerful control mechanism. Fedayeen patrols actively sought out individuals who were suspected of collaborating with British forces, or of organising potential uprisings. The civilians unfortunately were trapped in a web of competing and terrifying rumours. Claims that the British would bombard entire districts, warnings that the regime would retaliate fiercely, and the constant anxiety that remaining stationary could be just as risky as attempting to flee. Meanwhile, British forces chose to wait and observe the situation, gathering valuable intelligence. They preferred for the defenders to venture into open ground, where their advantages in range and optical clarity could be leveraged effectively. This strategy also aimed to evade the enemy's tactic of engaging in close quarters, room-to-room fighting. Although the encirclement was not formally labelled as a siege, for the city's residents the reality was grim. They endured interrupted water supplies, intermittent electricity, and long, tense stretches of silence, punctuated by occasional gunfire. By late March, analysts noted with increasing confidence that British units had gained control over the approaches to Basra, and that the opposition outside the city centre was dwindling, turning into disorganised skirmish lines and isolated sniper positions. On March 27, 2003, a standoff escalated into the largest British armoured engagement since World War II. Iraqi armoured units, prominently featuring T-55 tanks, launched an offensive from the southern approaches of Basra, aiming to disrupt the British encirclement and penetrate their defences. In response, the Royal Scots Dragoon Guards deployed their modern Challenger 2 tanks. Equipped with advanced thermal imaging sights, these tanks could detect heat signatures over considerable distances, allowing them to engage targets effectively before being seen. Their powerful 120mm guns significantly outranged the weaponry available to the Iraqi crews. In a matter of just minutes, the conflict unfolded dramatically, resulting in a one-sided outcome. A sequence of Iraqi tanks were destroyed in quick succession, with British crews demonstrating exceptional professionalism and tactical efficiency. The thick dust and smoke from the battlefield began to drift towards the city, painting a grim picture of defeat for the Iraqi forces. Contemporary accounts documented the destruction of 14 Iraqi tanks during this engagement, while British forces recorded 0 losses. This engagement highlighted the stark technological gap between the opposing forces. The British troops benefited from advanced composite armour and sophisticated fire control systems, contrasting sharply with the outdated Cold War-era equipment of the Iraqi army. Tactically, the British forces displayed well-coordinated combined arms operations, emphasizing teamwork, while the Iraqi forces launched their assault with a lack of effective coordination and planning. The significance of this battle extended beyond the destruction of machinery. It sent a powerful message to the Iraqi defenders that any attempts at armoured counterattacks would likely be futile. It also served as a crucial reminder to the British planners that while they enjoyed a substantial advantage in open terrain, those benefits would diminish significantly when faced with the complexities of urban environments, characterized by narrow alleys and multi-story buildings. On the morning of the 6th of April 2003, the British military launched an operation to take control of Basra, deploying the 7th Armoured Brigade. This strategic move aimed to minimize damage to the city, while overpowering the defending forces. The brigade included the Challenger 2 tanks, which advanced into the city to instill fear and provide protection, while Warrior infantry fighting vehicles transported soldiers to critical positions throughout Basra. Engineers were tasked with clearing obstacles to ensure safe passage, and artillery units targeted well-known enemy strongholds, while attack helicopters flew overhead, scanning for potential threats beyond immediate combat zones. During the initial hours of the operation, the noise of gunfire and explosions filled the air as British forces engaged in combat. Fedayeen fighters launched rocket-propelled grenades from upper floors of buildings before swiftly retreating in order to evade capture. Snipers positioned themselves in windows and minarets, picking off targets while remaining concealed, and small arms fire echoed around street corners that appeared calm from a distance of only 50 meters. The British troops carefully followed their engagement protocols, which were designed to safeguard civilians, even though these protocols often slowed their progress. In the older sections of Basra, where the narrow lanes were designed for pedestrians rather than armoured vehicles, infantry soldiers dismounted and advanced on foot. They meticulously cleared each room and rooftop, fully aware that every trigger pull could lead to significant consequences beyond the immediate target. As the day progressed, the humanitarian situation in Basra deteriorated rapidly. Power outages had affected entire districts, leaving residents without electricity, and the water supply system had failed as pumps stopped working, leading to a complete breakdown of water distribution to homes. Meanwhile, untreated sewage began to overflow into the streets, causing unsanitary conditions. Medical professionals struggled with severe shortages of supplies and were forced to use triage methods, prioritizing care for the most critical cases. The worsening conditions raised alarms with international organizations concerned about the city's children, who were particularly vulnerable as access to clean water diminished and illness quickly spread due to failing sanitation. Later reports from Human Rights Watch highlighted the extensive damage inflicted upon Basra's already fragile infrastructure. The organization noted that not only the conflict, but also pre-existing weaknesses in the systems contributed to the dire state of the city. The British command faced a significant dilemma. They had to decide between delaying the assault to prevent urban warfare, which could lead to increased civilian suffering, or advancing swiftly to minimize military casualties, knowing that such haste might inadvertently harm innocents and undermine the legitimacy required for governing afterwards. This was a complex situation, one that could not be resolved merely by improving intelligence or extending the timeline. Instead, commanders had to act based on the understanding that the defenders were becoming increasingly vulnerable, and that civilians could be protected during the advance. Occupation soon began after victory, but with the authority of the former regime dissolving, Basra divided predictably along lines of chaos. Looters aggressively stripped government ministries and schools of anything valuable, leaving behind empty shells of buildings. The police force largely disappeared, with some officers returning hesitantly, but they had little authority beyond wearing their uniforms. Various armed groups emerged, including militias forming in response to the situation, and opportunistic criminals who pretended to align with political goals. British troops who were trained to confront armoured vehicles and to breach fortified positions, instead found themselves dealing with day-to-day challenges. They redirected traffic at blown-out intersections, stood guard at hospitals that experienced blackouts after sunset, and escorted water trucks to neighbourhoods where the lack of clean water could ignite public unrest. The humanitarian crisis deepened further before showing signs of improvement, as restoring essential services and networks takes much longer than the work of dismantling them. But nevertheless, amidst the turmoil, these days brought a sense of emotional release. For the first time in decades, the Shia majority could joyfully celebrate religious rites that had been brutally suppressed by the Ba'athist regime. On April 20th, a significant festival drew large crowds into public spaces, allowing them to mark not only a key date on the religious calendar, but also the revival of a civic identity that had been strained yet remained unbroken. By the end of the month, oil exports resumed, signalling a tentative step toward political stability and economic normalization. While the narrative of liberation flickered across TV screens around the world, in Basra it felt like a light that briefly hums to life, only to flicker again. Conditions had certainly improved, but they were still far from stable. By early June 2003, human rights groups confirmed what many people in Basra already knew. Their safety depended on quickly restoring essential services and establishing order. After the fall of the regime, crime and insecurity had risen sharply, filling the gap left by the old government. The city's infrastructure, which was barely working before the war, now faced a complete breakdown. Water systems showed this crisis clearly. Without electricity to run the pumps, and without chlorine for water treatment, neighbourhoods quickly became unsafe. British engineers worked closely with Iraqi technicians in order to restore water flow, often with soldiers standing guard who had just days earlier been clearing the streets of armed gunmen. This time shaped the occupation. British forces had too few resources to make immediate improvements, while local institutions were weak and could not govern effectively. It became clear that armed forces alone could not rebuild this society. In September 2003, a tragic incident occurred which changed the views on military forces in the area. Baha Mausa, a hotel receptionist in Basra, died in British custody after suffering 36 hours of severe abuse from British soldiers. An investigation found serious injuries and abusive practices, including hooding and forced stress positions, which international law forbids. One soldier admitted to the abuse, but most others were found not guilty of any wrongdoing. This case left a deep scar on the British military. For many Iraqis, it highlighted the negative impact of the occupation on civilian life, and for British soldiers who valued their professionalism, it was a painful wake-up call that the line between protector and abuser could easily be blurred. Although British commanders aimed to build trust with strategies and rules of engagement, this incident weakened their moral authority. Rebuilding trust with a grieving and suspicious population would be a hard challenge indeed. The situation in Basra continued to change, even after British forces retreated to their new base at the airport. In March 2008, the Iraqi government launched Operation Charge of the Knights to confront the powerful militias in the city. This tested the Iraqi security forces, which often seemed weak. Throughout the operation, Iraqi units showed determination to reclaim control, but they still depended heavily on support from coalition forces. The militias fought back fiercely, but could not achieve a clear victory. The citizens of Basra faced another period marked by fear and strict curfews. For Britain, seeing an Iraqi-led effort in a city which they had taken by force was an important lesson about the challenges of transferring control. It highlighted that true security must come from local governance. While external forces can help, they risk harming local legitimacy when they intend to take over. On March 31, 2009, Britain officially handed over its last major military base in southern Iraq, Basra Airport, to US forces and then reduced their military presence. Official reports said that Basra had become safer and more hopeful, showing some signs of progress. However, residents' accounts revealed that the city remained unstable. Power often shifted unexpectedly, and basic services like electricity could fail at any time. In the aftermath of the short siege, both sides were tallying their losses. The invading forces, including the Royal Australian Air Force, employed both bombing and psychological tactics. On April 5th, US bombers targeted the residential area of Al-Tuwaisi in downtown Basra, reportedly intending to kill Ali Hassan al-Majid, famously known as Chemical Ali. Although in the end al-Majid was not present, the bombing tragically claimed the lives of 17 civilians, when one of the two 500-pound laser-guided bombs was dropped by US planes and hit the area. The use of cluster bombs also raised serious humanitarian issues, as they can leave behind unexploded bomblets that pose an ongoing danger to civilian life, very similar to a landmine. Initially, the UK was reluctant to admit that they had used cluster bombs, claiming that these munitions were not deployed near heavily populated civilian areas. However, on May 28th, Britain conceded to the use of cluster bombs in Basra. Armed Forces Minister Adam Ingram stated, quote, "We said they would be targeted at specific military objectives. Given that there were troops and equipment in and around urban areas, the bombs were used accordingly to eliminate threats to our forces." Ingram acknowledged that over 2,000 cluster bomb projectiles were deployed in Basra, primarily L-20A1 artillery shells fired from the ground. Each shell contained 49 smaller explosives, totaling around 102,900 individual grenades, with approximately 2% of these failing to detonate on impact. This would mean that there was just under 2,500 unexploded grenade-sized projectiles scattered across Basra. UK cluster bombs were responsible for dozens of civilian casualties in Basra during the early days of the conflict. Human Rights Watch reported numerous injuries inflicted on civilians caused by ground-launched cluster munitions around the city. One notably affected area was the Hay al-Muhandisin al-Kubra neighbourhood. On March 23rd, during a cluster strike, 13-year-old Abbas Kadim suffered severe injuries while taking out the garbage. Shrapnel caused critical damage to his bowel and liver, with a fragment embedding itself dangerously close to his heart. Just 3 hours later, submunitions struck the nearby neighbourhood of Al-Mishrak al-Jadid, located about 2.5 kilometers northeast. Ayad Jassim Ibrahim, a 26-year-old carpenter, was asleep in his front room when shrapnel injuries caused him to lose consciousness. Unfortunately, he later died during surgery, while 10 relatives in various nearby rooms also sustained shrapnel wounds. Additionally, 3 children from across the street were also injured by the same cluster strike. The aftermath of this attack left dud grenades scattered throughout Basra, resulting in injuries to children who picked them up in curiosity, and also to UK troops who were later involved in the cleanup efforts. Additionally, Iraqi military dud grenades also caused injuries among civilians. To address the threats posed by unexploded ordnance, British Royal Engineers conducted weeks of operations to locate and dispose of any stray grenades, which in the end proved quite effective. The Iraqi military employed both anti-personnel and anti-vehicle landmines in order to hinder the coalition's advance and to strengthen their urban defences. This resulted in casualties among both civilians and military personnel. Both US and UK forces utilised depleted uranium munitions during this battle. Officials in Basra raised concerns about these weapons, asserting that depleted uranium used in the 1991 Gulf War led to birth defects and cancer among the local population. Colonel James Norton, the director for US munitions, directly addressed these concerns, claiming that Iraq had exaggerated these accusations to deflect attention from their own military failures. In the Battle of Basra, early reports highlighted the loss of 11 British soldiers amidst the fierce fighting, while estimates of Iraqi military casualties ranged between 400 to 500. By the end of the mission, the total number of British fatalities in Iraq had climbed to 179, including many who had lost their lives during the arduous occupation, not just in the chaos of the invasion. A notable aspect of the British strategy in Basra was restraint of their forces. They opted to isolate targets, gather intelligence, and engage only when organised resistance had dwindled, with the aim of minimising the destruction typically associated with urban combat. This approach required soldiers to face danger head-on, fostering a more personal connection to their surroundings. It compelled non-commissioned officers to assert control against the instinctive urge to open fire, and forced commanders to risk their safety in order to protect civilians. Though this tactic had its shortcomings, it represented a significant departure from relying solely on overwhelming firepower, demonstrating a commitment to preserving the integrity of the city. The experiences in Basra offered the British Army invaluable lessons that no training could replicate. Today, the events of 2003 remain vivid in the collective memory of both the British and the Iraqi people, highlighting the complexities of a conflict that profoundly changed the lives involved.